Let's do this. I'm a dork. It's fine. Okay. Okay, guys, it is my 5th time filming this, so if I'm not a pro by now, then I don't know what to do. My camera has been not working, but let's see if this time I can make it all the way through. Today we are doing chapter 5, in which we will be talking about blood sugar and how to check your blood sugar. Blood sugar is the amount of glucose present in the blood of humans or animals. According to the American Journal of Physiology, Endocrinology, and Metabolism, it is estimated that you have about 4 grams of glucose in your blood at all times. The average range for someone who is not diabetic and is an adult is from 70 to 125. Also, if you're not being treated, diabetics tend to run a lot higher, and thus our blood sugars tend to be in a much greater range than somebody who is not diabetic. I know that for me personally, I'm happy if it's below 150, so a little bit outside of that 70 to 125 range. Now, high blood sugar, or above 125, is known as hyperglycemia. Low blood sugar, or numbers that are below 70, are hypoglycemia. I'm sure you guys have heard of hypoglycemics. These are people whose blood sugar naturally runs a little bit on the low side, and thus they have to make sure that they always have food on them so that they are not going into lows. Just so you guys know, if I say high or low, or if I say I'm high or low, I'm not talking about being depressed or being on drugs. I am simply not really wanting to say hyper or hypoglycemia all the time. Like, those are a little bit hard to say and a lot more difficult than just saying high or low, but just so you guys know for the future. So people who are not diabetic and who are not hypoglycemic can actually also have low blood sugars, especially if they have not eaten in a while or are doing strenuous activity, and in that case they are told to eat sugars. However, sadly for diabetics, it can go down a lot quicker, and this is because we are artificially regulating our intake of insulin, and thus because of that it can go low very quickly if we give ourselves too much insulin. This is because we have to estimate how much insulin our body needs. Because it's through a system of guessing and not actually given through the body, it is very difficult to get it 100% right 100% of the time, and thus our guesses can be off and we can give ourselves too much insulin, and that is when our blood sugar goes low. If we give ourselves too much insulin to an extreme amount, it can go low very, very fast, and that can be very scary. I know for myself personally, the lowest blood sugar I've ever had was 32, which is not a fun feeling and it is very, very scary. Also, just so you know, diabetics tend to run on the high blood sugar side, especially if they're not being given insulin or not being given enough insulin. The problem with diabetics tends to be that their numbers are running too high, and this can cause very serious damages to the body long term as well as short term. So yeah, diabetics tend to be high. We always make jokes that I'm high. I'm not actually high. I don't do that kind of thing. Props to you if you do. I don't, so. Another big thing in this whole scheme of blood sugars is hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is the percentage of sugar that has been in your blood for the last 3 months. It is tested through a small amount of blood. It's only able to test for the last 3 months because your red blood cells in your body actually die within 4 months, and because they don't undergo lysis at the exact same time, it is only accurate for about 3 months. This is all according to WebMD. WebMD also tells us that the average for a person who is not diabetic should be under 5.7%, whereas the goal for someone who is diabetic is 7% or less. Diabetics have a higher percentage goal because nobody can expect us to be perfect, because we are doing all this regulation ourselves instead of our body doing it. We are only human. We can't make it sure that it's always in between the 70 to 125 range, and thus our numbers are never going to be perfect or as close to perfect as someone who is not diabetic. Thus, the range is a little bit higher because our blood sugars, again, tend to run a little bit higher. However, like I said, this is a goal. I know for myself personally, I'm nowhere close to that goal right now, and I am working hard to get to that goal. However, I also know that when I was diagnosed, I was at about 13%, which is extremely, extremely high because I did not catch my diagnosis very soon. And so people who are diabetic, newly diabetic, can have an extremely high hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is generally taken by the doctors at my endocrinology appointments. I don't think they usually test for it unless they suspect you being diabetic, or if you are diabetic, and then it is kind of used as a monitor to see your progress. In this next part, I'm going to be talking about how to actually measure your blood glucose as well as how I personally take it. So I take my blood glucose through a glucose monitor. I use the Contour Link, which I believe is by Medtronic. However, you can actually get a glucose monitor at your local pharmacy, just over the counter. They have them in the pharmacy section, usually where there's diabetic things. However, they are easy to get. I personally get mine through a company, and I get the supplies for it through a company as well, just because it's a little bit more convenient to have supplies shipped to you if you have this problem long term. But yeah, anyone can buy it, and technically anyone can take their blood glucose. It is not a form of medicine and thus will not harm you if you take your blood glucose. There's really no point in taking it unless you fear you might be diabetic or if you are diabetic. But if you're just interested, I know I've had people want to check on my machine before just because they were simply interested in the process and how blood sugars work. Then you can technically get one if you want to, just at your local pharmacy. So when do you take your blood glucose? That can be kind of a tricky and long answer. As diabetic, you're supposed to take your blood glucose at least 3 to 4 times a day. However, there's a lot of times when you should take it. Not saying that everyone's perfect and they always do. Generally, you take it about 15 minutes before you eat so that you can correct for the food as well as for your blood glucose. Another time to take it is before bed in order to make sure that you're not trending low or that your number is not leaning on the low side. This is because if your number goes low in the middle of the night and your body does not wake you up, or if you do wake up and are too far into the low to be able to walk or move to get sugar, it can be very dangerous, and sadly you can end up not waking up at all ever again. So don't really want that to happen. Thus, you take your blood sugar before you go to bed in order to be safe and avoid a very bad situation. This is the same for when you are driving. If you are a person who drives, you are supposed to take your blood glucose before you drive, just in order to make sure it's not trending low and make sure that you don't end up having a low while driving and thus, have the possibility of harming yourself and or others. I will tell you from experience, I am not the best at taking my numbers, and I often don't take it before I drive, even though I should, and it can cause very, very scary situations in which you are in the car and all of a sudden you realize that you're extremely dizzy and have pretty much lost your ability to see correctly, and it can be very hard to pull over and take the medicine that you need in those times. So definitely take your blood sugar before you drive, because it's not fun to be that scared. Another time that it is suggested you take your blood sugar is if you are feeling the symptoms of a high or a low blood sugar, which I am planning to go into in next week's episode. However, if you ever feel like you're going low, take your blood sugar and then correct for that. The only time not to correct for if you feel like you're having high blood sugar is if you have recently taken insulin. if you've taken insulin in the last 2 to 3 hours and you take your number and realize that it's high, you should not take more insulin just because the insulin you already took is still running through your system. And if you take more, you can induce a low, which, because you already have insulin in your system, can happen very rapidly and go extremely low, extremely fast. In this next part, I'm going to be actually taking my blood sugar and showing you guys. This is not a gory process, however, it does involve some blood. So if you're extremely squeamish to blood, maybe don't watch this next part. It's just a finger poke and it is hardly any blood at all, but I don't want to just do it and then you realize, and if you're not good with blood, just skip past it. It's fine. Anyways, that's all for today, guys. I hope you learned something about blood glucose and how to check your blood sugar. Also, my next video should be up on Sunday, and I will be talking about what the process of coming back to real life after your diagnosis is, at least for me, and kind of the struggle of no longer being in the hospital. Let me just tell you, there is a lot, so it's probably going to be a pretty long video. Anyways, thank you for watching. If you're interested in learning more about diabetes, then go ahead and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.